I told you there was a hospital where no patient ever came out alive? A place where sickness was never treated, only taken advantage of. Where the weak were led in, but never led out. People whispered about the missing. Families searched for answers. But inside those walls, the only sound was silence, until it was too late. Don't worry, you won't feel a thing. This is the story of the hospital that nobody survived. For years, people came in, but they never came out. Until one day, someone exposed the truth. In a quiet village, nestled between rolling hills and a river that whispered secrets, the people lived simple lives. They tilled the land, raised their children, and gathered under the great baobab tree to tell stories of old. But a shadow loomed over them, growing darker with each passing year. At the heart of this unease stood a hospital, a place meant for healing, yet whispered about in hushed tones. It was built with walls as white as bone, its corridors long and quiet, swallowing those who entered. The sick went in, their loved ones hopeful. But days passed, then weeks, and they never returned. Mothers wept for children who vanished within its halls. Fathers stood at its gates, demanding answers, only to be met with silence. The village elder, a man whose wisdom had been passed down through generations, saw what others chose to ignore. His voice trembled as he warned, "Something is wrong with that hospital. People go in and never return." Yet, the doctor who ran it was untouchable. A man of great wealth, his riches seemed to grow as the village suffered. He dressed in the finest garments, feasted while others starved, and built mansions on land where crops refused to grow. His face held no sorrow, his hands carried no burden, and his heart, if he had one, beat only for profit. One by one, the villagers buried their fears, convincing themselves that their missing loved ones had simply been too sick to be saved. But one man refused to accept what others ignored. His name was Kofi, and his sister had walked into that hospital, never to be seen again. Kofi was no fool. He had seen the patterns, the way sickness never seemed to leave that place. He had heard the whispers, the rumors of beds that were always empty, though the sick never returned. And when the village turned away in fear, Kofi stepped forward, determined to uncover the truth. Under the cover of night, he approached the towering gates. His heart pounded, but his resolve was firm. Disguised as a sick man, he limped toward the entrance, his face hollow, his body wrapped in tattered cloth. He would not leave until he knew what had happened to his sister. The hospital swallowed him whole. The air was cold, the walls too clean, too perfect, as if they had never known the scent of medicine. He was led through corridors where no voices echoed, where every door was shut, sealing secrets behind them. The beds were neatly arranged, the sheets untouched. But where were the patients? He walked past rooms filled with medical equipment, tools that gleamed under dim lights. He listened closely, and in the silence, he heard them, the whispers. Faint voices slithered through the walls, too low to understand but laced with something chilling. Fear. The doctors moved in groups, their footsteps hushed. They whispered among themselves, glancing over their shoulders as if even they were afraid of what lurked in the dark. Kofi's pulse quickened. He knew, then, that he had walked into something far worse than he had imagined. He found a small closet, barely enough space to hide, and pressed himself against the wall. He listened. A door creaked open. Footsteps approached. And then, voices. The next shipment is ready. Fresh organs, no complications. Kofi's breath caught in his throat. His hands trembled as realization struck. This was not a hospital. It was a slaughterhouse. A place where the sick were not healed, but harvested. Their bodies emptied, their souls discarded. And his sister. He gritted his teeth, his mind racing. He could not panic. He could not leave. Not yet. He had come for answers, but now he would need to survive. Kofi's breath was shallow, his pulse hammering against his ribs. He had uncovered the truth, but the truth had its own weight, a weight that pressed upon his chest like a mountain. He needed to leave. He needed to run. But he needed proof. Proof that would shake the village from its slumber. Proof that would tear down the walls of this cursed place. His hands trembled as he moved, each step slow, deliberate, silent. He followed the whispers of the doctors, their words lingering in the air like a stench that would not fade. They spoke of shipments, of numbers, of bodies that were no longer people but products. And then he saw it, an iron door, rusted at the edges, marked with symbols that did not belong in a hospital. It was locked. But locks were only barriers to those who feared what lay beyond. He pressed forward, his fingers brushing against cold metal, his heart a storm within his chest. The door gave way, groaning like a beast disturbed from slumber. And inside, the air froze. A breath of death clung to the walls. The room was vast, stretching into the dark. And in its belly stood rows upon rows of freezers, each humming softly, each filled with what had once been life. Lungs, hearts, livers, all harvested, all waiting. This was no hospital. This was a marketplace of the dead. Kofi staggered back, bile rising in his throat. His mind screamed for him to flee, but then he heard it, something else, something not of this place. A sound too weak to be a whisper, too fragile to be a breath. He turned. And there she was. His sister. She was barely alive, her body limp, her skin ashen. The life had been drained from her veins, but her spirit still lingered. They had taken everything from her but time. And time, though fleeting, was still hers. Kofi did not think. He moved, his arms wrapping around her frail frame, his strength defying exhaustion. She was light, far too light. But she was breathing. And as long as she breathed, she could still be saved. He carried her, his steps swift but steady. But the walls had awakened. The hospital had felt the shift, sensed the escape, and now it stirred. The hallways stretched, the doors twisted upon themselves. Shadows curled along the ceiling, slithering like living things. The lights flickered, blinking in erratic bursts, as if something unseen controlled them. And behind him, footsteps. Not just one. Many. The doctors had seen. The doctors had heard. And the doctors would not allow them to leave. Kofi ran. The air thickened, pressing against his skin, slowing his steps. His sister clung to him, her breath warm against his neck. He would not stop. He could not stop. The doors ahead slammed shut, but before he could turn, another swung open on its own. The hospital was shifting, pushing him forward, pulling him deeper. It did not wish to let him go, but something else was guiding him. The spirits. The forgotten ones. The stolen ones. The ones whose voices had long since faded from the world of the living. They were here. Their presence wrapped around him, unseen but felt, their whispers no longer weak but powerful, commanding. They wanted justice. And justice would come. Behind him, the doctors drew closer, their hands outstretched, their needles glinting. They did not beg. They did not threaten. They had no need for words. They had done this before. They would do it again. But this time was different. Because Kofi was no longer alone. The spirits howled, their anger breaking through the walls. The ground trembled beneath his feet. The lights burst, plunging the corridor into darkness. And then, in the distance, a single door creaked open, a way out. He did not hesitate. He ran toward it, his legs burning, his breath ragged. The doctors were close, but the spirits were closer. The door widened, the wind howling through its frame. And then, just as the hands of the living reached for him, the hands of the dead pulled them back. A scream ripped through the air, not from Kofi, not from his sister, but from those who had never feared pain before this moment. The doctors stumbled, their bodies convulsing, their voices rising in agony. The spirits had caught them. The spirits had claimed them. Kofi stepped through the door, his sister held tightly against him. And as he did, the hospital shifted one last time. The walls groaned. The floors buckled. The very foundation of the place cracked, as if it could no longer bear the weight of its own sins. And then, as Kofi took his first breath of fresh air, the hospital let out its last. The night stretched long and heavy, pressing against Kofi like a second skin. His lungs burned, his sister's weight a burden he refused to acknowledge. The hospital, once a maze of confusion, now lay silent behind him. But the silence was not peace. It was something else. Something watching. Something waiting. It did not stop. His feet pounded against the cold floors as he searched for refuge. And then, an open door. A place untouched by the madness outside. A world, abandoned, forgotten by time itself. He pushed forward, stepping into the dust-filled air, the weight of ages settling around him. He laid his sister down upon an old cot, his breath unsteady, his mind a storm. But something was wrong. The air was too thick. The shadows were too still. And in the corner of the room, a single table stood, untouched by the years that had consumed everything else. Upon it, a book, thick with secrets, its leather cracked, its pages yellowed with time. It called to him, its presence an echo of something long buried. He reached out, his fingers tracing the dust that clung to its surface. And as he opened it, the past spoke to him. The words, though faded, burned themselves into his mind. The journal belonged to the hospital's first doctor. A man long dead, yet his voice lingered through ink and paper. He read, his eyes moving over lines that told a story far darker than he had imagined. This place, this hospital, was never meant for healing. It was never built to save lives. It was built upon something older than the village itself. It was built upon cursed land. Long ago, before walls were raised and floors were laid, this land was not empty. It belonged to those unseen, those who walked between words, their whispers carried by the wind, their presence felt in the shiver of trees. It was sacred. It was forbidden. But men do not listen to warnings etched into the earth. They built upon it, ignoring the pleas of the elders, ignoring the voices in the wind. And so, the land took its price. From the first breath of this hospital, death had already claimed it. The walls absorbed suffering. The floors drank blood. And the spirits, those who had once been called patients, were bound, their pain tethering them to this place. They did not sleep. They did not rest. They roamed, unseen, unheard, forgotten. Until now. Kofi's breath stilled. The air shifted. The room grew colder, the dust around him disturbed by something not of this world. And then, they came. Figures, moving within the dark, their shapes shifting, flickering like candle flames in a storm. Shadows stretched unnaturally, bending and twisting, forming outlines of what had once been human. Eyes, hollow and endless, stared at him, pleading without words. The spirits of the lost. The stolen. The ones whose voices had been silenced before their time. A whisper, thin as wind, yet as heavy as stone, filled the space between the living and the dead. It was not a threat. It was not a curse. It was something else. A plea. Save us, expose them. The words wrapped around Kofi, sinking into his bones, pressing against his very soul. He did not know how to answer. He did not know if he could. But the spirits did not need his voice. They needed his actions. The hospital had been built on lies, on greed, on the suffering of those who had walked through its doors never to leave. The land had swallowed them whole, but it had not forgotten. And now, through Kofi, it had chosen to be heard. The spirits did not linger. They did not need to. Their message had been given. And as they faded, dissolving into the very walls that had trapped them, Kofi knew, this night was not yet over. The living had taken from the dead for too long. Now, the dead would take back what was theirs. The night held its breath as Kofi clutched his sister's frail body, his mind a whirlwind of urgency and dread. The spirits had spoken. The truth had been revealed. But the battle was not yet won. The walls of the cursed hospital still stood, and those who had built their wealth upon suffering still walked free. He needed to act. He needed to escape. Through dim corridors, he moved with purpose, the weight of his sister pressing against his back. Each step was a prayer, each breath a plea to the ancestors watching from beyond. The halls twisted, the air thick with the remnants of sorrow. And then, he saw it. A door, half hidden, leading downward into the belly of the hospital. He did not hesitate. He descended. The morgue. A place where the dead were stored before their final journey. But here, in this place of corruption, the journey never ended. The bodies remained, nameless and forgotten, their fate sealed by hands that had never sought to heal. He moved past the cold slabs, the air heavy with the weight of those who had been silenced. The exit loomed ahead, a single door standing between him and the night beyond. He pushed through, the chill of freedom rushing over him like a tide. The village was silent, its people lost in dreams, unaware of the horror that lay just beyond their walls. Kofi did not stop. He did not allow the darkness to slow him. His feet carried him forward, past the empty streets, past the sleeping homes, until he stood before the elders' hut, the heart of wisdom and judgment. He called out, his voice raw with urgency, his words spilling like a flood. He told them of the freezers, of the missing, of the whispers in the dark. But the village had lived in fear for too long. Fear had become their shelter, their excuse. They looked at him with doubt, with hesitation. And then, from the shadows of the gathering, a voice rose. An old midwife, her face lined with years of silence, her eyes heavy with knowledge long buried. She stepped forward, her hands trembling as she spoke. I worked there years ago. I saw things, terrible things, and in that moment, the fear that had gripped the village cracked. The elders listened. The silence was broken. Justice had been awakened. The message was sent. The wheels of reckoning turned. And as the moon reached its peak, the village no longer stood still. The police arrived, their torches casting long shadows against the walls of the cursed hospital. The gates, once unyielding, grown open under the weight of judgment. And then, they entered. The rooms lay still, the halls holding their breath, as if waiting. The freezers stood in their rows, the truth frozen within them. The police moved, their voices sharp, their commands ringing through the corridors. And then, a sound. A rustling, a shifting of footsteps. The doctors ran, their white coats billowing like ghosts of their own making. But the doors that once opened so easily to welcome the sick, now refused to let them leave. The spirits had awoken. The air thickened, pressing down with the weight of those who had been stolen from life. The lights flickered, their glow pulsing like a heartbeat. And then, shadows moved. Shapes emerged, stretching from the walls, from the floors, from the very air itself. Figures, faceless yet filled with fury, the remnants of souls that had long been trapped. They did not scream. They did not wail. They simply reached. Hands of mist and darkness, cold as the grave, grasped at the fleeing doctors. Limbs stiffened. Voices choked in terror. The living, so used to taking, now had everything taken from them. The police stood frozen, watching as something beyond their power unfolded. The spirits had come for what was theirs. And then, the head doctor. The man whose wealth was built upon suffering. The man who never trembled, never bowed. He fell to his knees, his face twisted with horror as he beheld the truth he had long ignored. The spirits did not hesitate. They did not pause to hear his pleas. They had heard enough over the years, heard the cries of those he had silenced, the last breaths of those he had discarded. He had no more words to offer. The darkness swallowed him whole. The hospital let out a final, shuddering breath. The walls, heavy with suffering, groaned under the weight of their sins. The spirits, their duty fulfilled, began to fade, their forms dissolving like mist beneath the morning sun. And then, silence. Kofi watched, his sister still weak in his arms, as the place that had once been a prison to so many stood empty at last. The dead had found their justice. The living had been freed from their fear. And the land, once cursed, now stood in waiting. Waiting for time to reclaim what man had tainted. The hospital would never welcome another soul again. The hospital was shut down, its doors sealed, its hallways emptied. No patient would ever walk its cursed floors again. The police left, the villagers whispered, and the world moved on. But the land did not forget. For places like this do not simply die. They do not crumble into dust and become memories lost to time. No, they remain, lingering, waiting, feeding on the echoes of what once was. And so, the hospital stood, abandoned but not empty, silent but never truly still. The villagers spoke of it only in hushed tones, their voices careful not to carry too far in the wind. They told stories of strange lights flickering through the broken windows at night. Of shadows that stretched and moved even when no soul stood near. Of whispers carried on the evening breeze, too faint to understand yet too chilling to ignore. Some say the spirits found peace the night justice was served. Others claim they never left. That they roamed the ruins, trapped in the place where their final breaths were stolen. That those who pass too close feel unseen eyes upon them, hear footsteps where no one walks. That if you dare to stand before its rusted gates under the full moon, you may hear the cries of those still searching for escape. A warning now passes from elder to child, from traveler to stranger. Some hospitals heal. Others take lives. Be careful where you go. Be careful what doors you walk through. For not every hand that offers healing truly seeks to cure. And not every building that stands is empty. And if, one night, you hear a voice calling from an abandoned place, soft and weak, pleading for help, walk away. Do not answer. Do not enter. Some cries are not meant to be heard. Some doors are never meant to be opened. Please subscribe to the channel and drop your thoughts in the comment section, help us reach 1000 subscribers.